joining me today. I'm very excited to be sharing this card with you today featuring some Distress ink watercoloring, and I'm also going to be blending in some Nouveau embellishment mousse to create a shimmery watercolor effect on my card. I'm going to be using this adorable new stamp set from Art Impressions. This is one of their newer stamp sets, and I think it is simply so cute. This stamp set features a bunch of different squirrels, all with this really fun squirrel theme. The sentiments even reflect that as well. I'm going to be using this stamp set for the main image on my card, and I'll also be using one of the sentiments included. I'm mounting it into my Misty stamping tool. Now originally this card, I was starting off in a different direction. I was going to actually originally stamp this flat onto a card, and I was going to have it be one layer, but I ended up deciding I wanted to add some dimension, and I didn't end up liking the background that I was going to add to the original card design. So I ended up changing everything completely, but I did want to show you this process, showing you that sometimes you end up changing the total direction that you were going with this particular card design. So don't feel bad, it happens to all of us. Now you notice I'm restamping this image because I didn't press it down all the way in the center very well. So because I was using the Misty stamping tool, that allowed me to restamp the image and get a perfect impression right back over top of where I had stamped it originally. Now like I said, I was going to be doing some watercoloring with Distress crayons. Now if you're not familiar with Distress crayons are a water-reactive pigment, and they all come in the same colors that you can get in the other Tim Holtz Distress line. Because they're water reactive, I can do watercoloring techniques with them, and they really create some really fun effects when you do watercoloring. They are a little bit different than regular watercolors. They have a little bit more texture than a regular watercolor does. But I really think they look gorgeous when you end up finishing up with the coloring. You can get really light and pastel in the color tone, or you can get really bright and bold, which is what I'm going to be doing. I'm going to be creating multiple layers, and I find that it's easiest to do that by applying most of my color with the Distress crayons on a palette. And for that palette, I'm using the Art Impressions palette. This is a really great hard plastic surface, and I can scribble on any type of water-reactive medium, and I can clean it off when I'm done and not have to worry about the palette being dirty or stained or anything like that. It cleans off beautifully. So I'm continuing adding color to these images. I've used a variety of different colors such as Rusty Hinge, Vintage Photo, Candied Apple, Picked Raspberry, and Worn Lipstick. I also ended up adding in a few lighter colors as well. Now after I did all my base coloring, I created a few layers of each color on each critter and also the balloon. I'm bringing in the Distress crayon, and I'm going directly onto the paper this time instead of applying it to my palette. The reason I'm doing this is because the Distress crayon, when you apply it down onto the paper, it has that crayon look to it. So it almost looks like a gelato or something like that when you apply it down onto specially textured paper. So I'm going to add this to my images to create the effect of fur, because I'm using that to my advantage to give me that realistic textured effect, and I think it really just finishes off these critters nicely. I also use that same technique for the balloon, but this time I'm making sure I maintain a really good highlight on the balloon because that's going to allow my balloon to look dimensional. You'll also notice that background on this card. This is the background that I mentioned earlier where I want to go ahead and change this up and not end up using the background that I added here. It just wasn't turning out to the way I had envisioned it. And I'll go ahead and show you that in a few minutes here, how I went ahead and fixed this. So now I'm adding in some other details with a black pen, and I'm also going to bring in a white Signo pen as well. I'm just darkening up the eyes and the nose, and then with the white pen I'm going to go ahead and add some dot details to the fur just to give them a little bit more interest. I think this was really cute to add the white details with the gel pen. So now it's time to go ahead and fussy cut these images out, because this is where I decided I wanted to create a dimensional effect with these little critters. So I'm cutting these out with my fine tip scissors. These are from Cutter Bee, and I'm being very careful as I cut around this. I'm moving the paper and not the scissors, and that's going to allow me to get a clean cut. Now because I had already done a background on this particular piece of watercolor paper, I wanted to go ahead and hide that color that we have along the edges. So I just took a white gel pen and that hid it completely, and you would never know that I ended up cutting this out of a panel that I had already watercolored a background onto. So speaking of backgrounds, now I'm going to go ahead and start working on creating the actual background that I'm going to be using on my card. So I'm taping a piece of watercolor paper. This is Strathmore watercolor paper, the same paper I used to color the critters. I'm taping it down onto a hardboard. I'm going to scribble on some reds and pinks and start blending these into the background to create a really beautiful watercolor effect. I'm going to mix these together a lot just to really get the colors moving. I'm going to use my Distress sprayer to help add some water, and I'm just really playing around with this, being very random with the placement of the color and allowing the colors to blend together. And I'll spritz them with water again to get them moving even more. And I'm just playing with it. I'm having a lot of fun. It's fun to create a watercolor background that you don't really have to think about and just kind of place color around. I'm also splattering it with some of those same colors, and that just adds some extra texture to the background and really finishes this off. I set that aside to dry while I went ahead and mixed up my shimmer spritz. Now this shimmer spritz I'm creating using some water. I filled a little travel water sprayer. You can find these in the beauty section of any store, such as your grocery store, Target, places like that. I'm taking some of the Nouveau mousse and I'm going to apply this into my spray bottle. Now I'm being very generous with the amount of mousse that I'm sticking into my spray bottle, and that's just because I want to make sure that I have a pretty good shimmer. The more mousse you add to the water, the more shimmery you will have it, and the less mousse that you have, the less shimmery your water will be. This is very similar to creating a shimmer spray with perfect pearls. The mousse is a little bit thicker, and so you want to go ahead and shake that up really, really good until you have all of that mousse mixed into the water and completely liquefied. Now I'm going to take that spray bottle, I'm going to spritz my panel really well to get the shimmer spritz onto my watercolor paper. This watercolor paper is not fully dry. I wanted it to be slightly damp yet, so that way it blended in with the watercolors a little bit. I'm also going to use the end of the nozzle and flick on some droplets of shimmer, and then I let that completely dry, and I did not heat set it, I let it air dry. Once it was air dried and it's all finished, I'm taking this postage stamp die from Hero Arts. These are some of my favorite dies right now. And I die cut that panel. I'm also going to use some of that shimmer spritz. I spritzed it onto my little palette from Art Impressions. And I'm just picking it up and dabbing it onto my balloon here. You can see once it dries, that great subtle shimmer that you have on your balloon. And the background is the same way. It's very subtle. It's hard to capture in the video and in the light, but it is really beautiful in real life. It captures the light beautifully. So I'm going to take one of the sentiments now and I'm inking it up with some crimson ink from Hero Arts. I'm going to stamp this down along the area there in between the two little squirrels. I laid the squirrels down onto my panel and adhered them down with my magnets just to make sure I was getting them in the right place. I'm also going to re-ink that sentiment using some Simon Says Stamp Clear ink because I want to clear heat emboss this. And of course the Misty Stamping Tool makes that so much easier because I can stamp right over top of it and know I got a perfect placement. So I just used some Simon Says Stamp Detail Clear Embossing Powder, and I'll go ahead and heat set that. Now it's time to start putting my card together. So I'm taking those little critters and I'm adding some foam tape to the back side. This is what I meant when I said I wanted to add some dimension with these critters. So I'm using foam tape to go ahead and pop them up off of my panel. I created another watercolor background, this time just using reds, and I also added that same shimmer to the background as well. I'm going to die cut it with these holiday shapes, heart dies from Simon Says Stamp. There's also stars, but I just wanted the hearts, and I wanted to use those to create some little hearts floating in the sky with my little critters. And then to completely finish the card, all I did was add it to a white card base, and I also stuck a little strip of pattern paper along the left-hand side, and that finished off this card completely. So I hope this is giving you some inspiration on doing some watercoloring with Distress Crayons, and maybe even add some shimmer with the Nouveau embellishment mousse. By just mixing it with a little bit of water, you can create some really gorgeous shimmers. The Nouveau embellishment mousse comes in a variety of different colors. Also, I'll mention that the Distress Crayons are now available in a complete set. So Ranger just released their final 3 packs of the Distress Crayons, and also there's one single color, which is Bundled Sage. All of these are available over at Simon Says Stamp for pre-order. They will be shipping very soon. So if you're interested in that, I have all those products linked in the video description, along with all the other products I used in today's card. Thanks so much for stopping by and spending some time with me. I hope I will see you again soon, and have a very happy Monday. Bye!